All right, so everybody, thanks so much. If you're listening to us on one of the 25 radio stations that this program does appear on, we greatly appreciate that. Keep listening. If you're listening to us on one of the podcasting sites, we do appreciate that also. Share this podcast if you could as well, because we are trying to keep up with great guests, and we do have a great guest coming on the program today. This is Auron MacIntyre here. He is the author of Total State: How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrants. If you want to follow Auron, you can follow him at auronmacintyre.substack.com. Sign up for his Substack there. Also on Twitter is Auron MacIntyre on Twitter. The Auron MacIntyre Show is his program. It is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Rumble, and YouTube, again, at the Auron MacIntyre Show. Auron, thanks so much for coming on. Greatly appreciate your time today.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Right, so let's kick this around and just kind of start off speaking about the book and what made you want to write the book. When I think about your book, I think about what went on in COVID and all the censorship there. Is that when this book kind of came into your mind, or was it before that?
I had worked in politics a little bit. I had been a political reporter. And so the more I saw what was going on, especially after Donald Trump got elected to his first term and the way that the media responded to him, I knew that there was something that was wrong with the way that I understood government power in the United States. But yeah, when we got to COVID, that's what really hit me because, I'm like a lot of people. I grew up kind of listening to conservative talk radio. I sat through the different lessons in school all about how you've got this Bill of Rights and separation of powers, and this is going to forget or prevent government from overreaching. But then we saw what happened in the COVID crisis. You had churches that were closed while the liquor stores and the strip clubs were open. You couldn't go to your grandma's funeral, but we could riot in the streets. It just didn't make sense. It didn't jive with any of the things that I understood about power and politics. And so this book is really my intellectual journey of trying to reconcile what was really happening with what I had been taught about government and power and how the Constitution worked. And so my hope is that people who read this, it gives them an idea of what happened, but also how hopefully we could go about changing that, preventing it in the future.
So I used to be, for people just, tuning in, a lot of people that have tuned into the program do know this. I used to be very far to the left, or I was a Bernie Sanders guy. I voted for, even going back to 2008 with my first vote, voted for Barack Obama, voted for Barack Obama in 12, voted for Hillary in 16, voted for Biden in 20. What happened to me, Auron, was in 2021, I got the COVID jab, and due to that, I got injured. And then obviously, I met many people that got injured, talked to many of the frontline doctors, Dr. Robin Malone, Dr. Peter McCullough, Mary Talley Bowman, Pierre Corey. The list goes on and on of these people that were censored, but they were trying to help people. So that's what kind of woke me up to seeing what the heck is going on. And also, as you have a show, I do as well. That's what we're talking on. I would put these people on that are, legitimate doctors. They've had, medical papers that have been published, and they were getting censored, whether it was on Twitter, whether it was on YouTube. So I started to wake up due to the injury, due to the censorship, and say, what the hell is going on in our country? And I was voting for these people. And, between us and everybody listening, I think I was brainwashed, but I was voting for these people throughout my life, and they were taking away my rights fully, even more than they were before during COVID. Let's talk a little bit about that, because it seems like in this time, there's a lot of people, whether in my issue was I got injured, but a lot of people in general saw what happened in COVID. They were staunch Democrats, very far to the left liberals, such as I was, and they really woke up due to the craziness. Are you talking with a lot of people on your program, also meeting people, maybe it's a family and a friend that was far to the left, and due to COVID, they really woke up and said, what the hell is going on in our country? And we can't vote for these people anymore because they're psychos.
Well, I live in Florida, and Florida is a interesting experience because, of course, there was a rapid shift of people moving down here. We've always had a lot of people from New York, New Jersey. The joke is you make your money up north and then you retire in Florida. So there's nothing new there, but the political positions of people coming to Florida changed rapidly after COVID. It very quickly became not just a place that you moved because it was cheaper. In fact, it's not cheaper anymore because so many people have
Right.
moved down here. You moved down here because you wanted to be free of the restrictions that were happening. And even if your politics had been previously left wing, when you're trapped in your home, you know there's something wrong. When you can't go to the beach and without a mask on, when your children are being kept out of school for years, you know there's something wrong, even if you don't understand the underlying political problem. And like you were saying, you're a Bernie Sanders supporter. You should have seen that problem far away because Bernie Sanders got cheated out of an
Right.
election by the Democratic Party. We can see how this machine was working against anyone, even somebody like Bernie, who's speaking out mildly against what was going on. And so I think what happened to a lot of people, yourself included, I'm sure many people on the left looked at this system that was supposed to be objective. The experts were in charge. These people aren't partisan. They're part of the civil service, right? This is what we're hearing so much right now. Trump is attacking our democracy because he's attacking our neutral civil servants. But what guys like you learned very quickly is that there is no neutral, civil service, that the doctors that were supposed to be objective experts in a large part were willing to cancel the people you've talked to for actually doing science. And so while we were sold this idea that our liberal institutions transcend political bias, what we quickly learned is actually these are ideological to the core. And that's how you get a total state, a powerful bureaucracy that is very heavily invested in a particular ideology will quickly collapse all of its competencies, all the jobs it's supposed to do in the pursuit of ideological conformity. And I think that's why so many people, even if they still hold a number of left-wing presuppositions, are recognizing the danger of this ideological infiltration.
I just want to put the exclamation on what you said. In Florida, can we imagine if Governor Andrew Gillum got those 35,000 votes and became governor back in 2018? Listen, I'm in Florida as well. I was all on the Andrew Gillum train at that time. Again, I was very brainwashed in the liberal hysteria. Can we imagine what would have happened? Also, even to touch on what you just stated, Auron, Florida was a swing state. Obama barely won Florida in 2008 and 2012. Trump only won Florida in 16 by 1 point. In 20, he won by 3. Governor DeSantis opened up Florida with that win in 2022 over Charlie Crist by 19 points. And then obviously Trump winning by 13. It seems like Florida is just totally over right now. And that's due to partially what's going on nationally, but also the inept Democratic Party in the state of Florida that is just a bunch of wacko jackos, and they don't even come to the center. We'll see what happens in 2026 with Byron Donalds and also Casey DeSantis as what's going to happen there in that Republican primary. I do want to just remind people who we are chatting with. This is Auron MacIntyre. I do hope people go to Auron MacIntyre's Substack, and it is auronmcintyre.substack.com, at Auron MacIntyre on Twitter, and the Auron MacIntyre Show, Apple, Spotify, Rumble, YouTube, the list goes on and on. Just to kind of continue on into the book, we talked a lot about COVID. I want to even backtrack, Auron, a little farther than that and bring us back to the Patriot Act, 9/11, and maybe we agree on this, maybe we don't, but I was very young at the time, but it seemed like at that time, the right of the country with President Bush and Dick Cheney were more in the censorship realm, obviously, than the right now, which is not as censoring anybody, the left is. Can you bring us back to that time? And do you agree with that the Patriot Act kind of started this slow shift into the censorship realm that we have now?
Well, like you, I was a lot younger then. I remember actually going out and campaigning as a young Republican for George Bush on college campuses, which was so wildly popular at the time, as you can imagine. But yeah, this is something that obviously, as a young conservative, I got very wrong, which was the understanding that the problems that we were facing required a high degree of basically a surveillance state on a regular basis in order to defend us from what was going on. Now, to be clear, I'm not against government power as a principle. I'm not someone who's like, in all cases, I'm not a libertarian. We have to obliterate all of this. However, what I am very wary of is a state in which the organizations are attempting to monitor the populace on a regular basis for some level of ideological conformity or threat. Because as we can see, what happened with the Patriot Act is initially we were told this is to prevent terrorism, this is to keep some guy from checking out 20 books at the library about bomb making, as if that was a thing. But in reality, what happened is quickly the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security turned around and named white Christian Republicans as the most dangerous group in the United States. This is where all our terrorism comes from. Don't pay attention to all those guys, who are running around screaming Allahu Akbar. That's not the most important thing. That's a religion of peace. What you need to be worried about is the Christians in a Southern Baptist church somewhere who might be, I don't know, planning some white supremacist takeover. Like, this was the storyline that got fed to the Americans after the Patriot Act got passed, and the way that the focus shifted. And so what became clear is that a weapon that was initially supposed to be used against the enemies of the state shifted to the subjects of the state, because they became the most dangerous thing to the state. And that's really what I want people to understand. I worry about threats like China. I worry about threats like Russia, yes. But the most dangerous threat to American liberty inside our borders has been the American deep state, has been the American total state. That is where the real threat has come from. And so while I don't want us to fall behind in competition with geopolitical enemies, I'm not somebody who just completely forgets that these people exist. I do think that we have to turn a significant amount of our effort inward. And that's why I think it's so important that you have guys like Donald Trump making an attempt to dismantle the administrative state. I don't know if he's going to be successful in that. I've seen some successes, I've seen some failures. However, there is a significant mentality shift from the first term to the second term. And in the second term, you hear guys like J.D. Vance, Ramaswamy specifically say we have to worry about the administrative state. We have to worry about the managerial class. These are people who understand the terminology. They understand the nature of the problem. And now we'll see if they can, take over, if they can actually unseat that kind of managerial class from its position. But the simple fact that they're aware of it in a way that just they weren't back in 2016 is very important.
Are you worried about these global conglomerates like the WEF specifically? I mean, we could look at all of them, the European Union, the WHO, the list goes on and on, but specifically the WEF, because it seems like that is where there is power in numbers. They had their meeting earlier on in January. Brian Stelter, former CNN anchor, was there with some European woman. I don't know her name, so forgive me for that. But they were talking about misinformation and disinformation, and how there is already these policies put in place to knock people out as far as the censorship in Europe already. But this woman was telling Brian Stelter that it is coming to the US. I mean, technically, if we want to be truthful to each other and the listeners, it's already here, Auron, but it could get worse. And it looks like, 1984 is on its way. We saw this during COVID, and it could, recalibrate even worse. God forbid if a Democrat gets in there again, which hypothetically, if we're being truthful to ourselves, there could be another Republican after this 4 years, but eventually a Democrat will come in there. And if they don't get their act together, they will send us even further down the censorship road. So are you worried about, again, these organizations like the WEF?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, this is a significant part of what my book is about, is the danger of scale, right? The wider the governance is, the more it abstracts from the original people it's supposed to be taking care of, the more tyrannical it becomes. And so supranational governance like the EU or the WEF is very unresponsive to the goods and the needs of the people because it is so far away. And our founding fathers understood this. This is why federalism was key to the Constitution, because they understood that having decisions made as close to the source of the problem as possible makes it far more likely that these solutions will be human, that they will be grounded in the good of the people and the understanding of what's going on with them, and will not be a self-serving thing for the class of politicians. Now, Republicans are better on this than Democrats, but I want to make clear they're not much better, because our issue is really, again, one of bureaucracy. This is ultimately the nature of this form of governance. And so the wider we try to make our control of the area controlled by our governance, the more it must become technological, technocratic, and totalitarian. I just was at the ARC conference. This is Jordan Peterson's kind of competitor to the WEF, right? It's very clear he wants to make like a more reasonable global governance organization to compete. And their heart is in the right place, right? They want free speech. They talk about the importance of even Christianity as a core value of the West. This is a notably different organization, but at the edges of the organization, you can feel the core problem, which is they are trying to coordinate too many people under the same governmental body. And, Peter Thiel was even giving a presentation there talking about this very issue. In this current state, all of our government actors must become mass propaganda and mass technocratic machines in order to protect themselves from other mass propagandic and technocratic regimes. So if you want to fight with China at its scale, you have to do a lot of the things that China is doing. Not because they're good for people, but because it's the only way to keep up with the mass bureaucratic drive that comes out of that state. And so this is a much larger problem than just left or right, though there are people on the left and right that are better on this. Ultimately, this is a problem about the way we perceive government structures. And if we don't address that issue, then things like the WEF and the EU will succeed in censoring people, because that is the only way they can manage that number of people under the auspices of their government.
Are you worried about big tech and the intertwining with the Trump administration? We saw during the inauguration that, the people behind him had better seats than his own cabinet. People like Jeff Bezos, people like the list goes on and on. I'm going to blank here, but Mark Zuckerberg was back there. The list goes on and on for these people. Tim Cook of Apple. And it seems like the technocracy is intertwined with, it was also obviously the Trump administration, but also Obama, also Biden. They are involved in all these administrations. Again, as you stated, Auron, there's one administration that's better than the other, as Trump is better than Biden or better than Obama, but there's still that intertwining. That worries me, again, because these big tech billionaires, Peter Thiel included, are really pushing these politicians in the direction that they want, not specifically the direction the people want. So what is your opinion on this?
Peter Thiel famously said that competition is for losers. And this is a mistake that a lot of Republicans make. They think that big business is capitalistic and for the free market, but of course it's not. Any good businessman, starting with Rockefeller, knew that making sure that you could control every aspect of the process was the key to making yourself the most dominant actor in the process. And so there's no surprise that these tech zillionaires are out there just glomming on to whoever can secure a monopoly for them in any given tech arena, because they know that ultimately what they're trying to do, whether it's build giant spy networks or launch rockets to Mars, will require a good amount of cooperation with the state. There's simply no state that can be completely neutral when it comes to those activities, because those activities are so large that they basically constitute a state apparatus, whether you acknowledge it or not. And so again, this is why in the book, I take the time to destroy the myth of the public and private sector distinction in the minds of the average person. We think that because the people operating a private business are in a private business, they aren't acting on behalf of the state. But if you look at who is actually running these businesses and moving in between the government and in between the private industries, we see it's the same actors over and over again. The same people are serving in administrations and then turning around and running Fortune 500 companies. There's a reason that all of the lawyers and other actors inside, say, Facebook tend to be former CIA agents or DHS, because they have that experience in the governmental sector and regulation that they bring to the private sector and vice versa. So this relationship is much closer than we pretend that it is. And I think at some point, again, that might be inevitable due to the scale on which we're operating. And so if we want to see any of this change, we need a significant rethinking of the way we centralize power, especially in Washington, D.C. But in the short term, the tech oligarchs are going to wield power either way. So I'm glad they used it to get Donald Trump elected this time. But yeah, I don't think that gives them a free pass, thinking, oh, well, then they just are all big free speech proponents. That's obviously just not the case.
We just saw a woman that was in the FDA, left when Trump got elected, just turned around, went into Pfizer. She was in the FDA in regards to making sure the COVID vaccine got authorized in emergency use. So again, it's the revolving door. That's just the health aspect. I mean, again, as you stated, Auron, this goes around with every part of government. I want to just kind of conclude the interview with this, Auron. Obviously, politicians are bought on the left, on the right. How do we as Americans fight against this? Because let's be truthful to each other and the people listening. There's not going to be any term limits anytime soon. I know the president has pushed for this, but listen, if you're in Congress or in the Senate, you're not going to vote for term limits because you want to get your cake and you want to eat it too. They're not going to do this. So again, how do we deal with this as American people? Because we are the suckers in plain English most of the time.
Unfortunately, this is a much more difficult problem to solve. One of the upsides of the American experiment is, in a way, we destroyed the old class system, right? You don't have this hard distinction between classes in the United States. There's a lot more social mobility. The downside of this is you lose some of the positive aspects of aristocracy. And one of the positive aspects of aristocracy was understanding that you had a specific duty to the people based on where you were. In fact, in ancient Rome, if you were someone who was awarded a political office, it was your job to pay for the things that that office did, not the other way around. You didn't make money. It was your job to pay for the games, to pay for the Colosseum, to pay for the things that were given to the people. That was part of your aristocratic generosity for fulfilling that role. Because we have this inverse situation, common people go to Washington, but unfortunately what happens is most of them end up in the scenario where they become far more wealthy than they were before, even though they're only making, this 150 whatever $1,000 a year. And the way that happens is because they didn't have any money, they get swayed by the opportunity to make that money while they're there. And so this is just a very difficult situation that we have. We have shifted to this moment of money power, right? Oligarchy is really the thing that is the most powerful. There's a reason that Donald Trump and Elon Musk are the two most powerful men in America right now. That's not a mistake. In previous ages, the martial class, right? Warriors would have had a lot more sway, or priests. But in our world, it's the merchants that have the most power. And so this is a problem we haven't yet overcome. And I don't have the easiest answer to that. However, I think that one thing, again, that we can do is attempt to shift more focus to local resilience, more and more state and community-based power and decision making, rather than shifting everything up to Washington, where it becomes a giant battle of who can buy the most ads.
Yeah. And we've seen that in the state of Florida when Governor DeSantis got in there, that he is trying to, especially in the school system, make sure that there's regulations from the people in the school districts. And we're seeing that a lot more in the state of Florida. Grateful to, as you are, I'm sure, to be a resident of the state of Florida, because there are a lot of good things happening. And hopefully in 2026, they continue on. Let's end the program with this. Obviously, we do hope people get the book. It is How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies. Excuse me. It is Auron MacIntyre on Substack. Auron, let's talk about the end here with the book. So, what do you hope people learn from the book when they buy it? Because obviously, there's a lot of good things that we do hope people learn, because this is stuff that's going on not just in this country, but around the world right now. They are taking away your freedoms slowly but surely.
Well, I hope there's two things. One, that ultimately what restricts government is not words on paper. The Constitution is a beautiful document, but it's only a beautiful document because it's reflecting the beliefs that the people who founded America had, right? It's not the words themselves that have the power, but it was the belief that Americans had in a restricted government, a divided government, one that had limitations, and an understanding that emanated from the culture and traditions of the people. So if you get rid of those culture, those traditions, those beliefs, that religion, then you lose the power of the document itself. The document is only a instantiation of those beliefs. And when those are gone, then there's nothing actually stopping the government from doing what it's doing. The reason that the government was able to run over the Constitution is that the people of the United States didn't truly believe in it. And that's the real problem at the end of the day. The solution that I kind of point to in the book, again, is that localization. If you don't have a World Health Organization that can tell you and dictate to you how you are going to act during a disaster, then it doesn't matter. You don't have to worry about them coming in and changing that. You don't have to give them the power of the emergency and the exception to completely override the common sense of the average person. If you don't have these giant bureaucratic organizations that are wielding the power of the expert, then they won't have that ability to come in and override your life and override the freedoms that you were guaranteed in the Constitution. So we need to believe once again in this. We need to accept the traditions, folkways, and religion that gave us the Constitution. And just as importantly, we need to dismantle the organizations that are so large that they will inevitably breach those restrictions that the Constitution laid out in the first place.
I just want to put my 2 cents in before we end the program here, Auron. Do you also think the solution is that we get back to teaching civics in school? From the majority of schools around the country, we don't teach civics. People don't know any of the Bill of the Rights. They don't know what the Constitution is. They don't even know who the hell the president and the vice president is, for that matter. If we do that again and educate our country, educate our society, we do become a better country. We do become better voters in return. And hopefully we make sure that we put better people in due to becoming better voters. So it's kind of that domino effect. I feel like you would agree with that as well.
Yeah, I was a civics teacher. I was a high school civics teacher, so of course that's near and dear to my heart. But importantly, I think it's important that we recognize that the reason that the truths in the Constitution or in the Declaration of Independence were held to be self-evident was that the people who were observing them had a specific understanding of the world. They had a Christian understanding, they had a English understanding, a specifically Anglo understanding of law and the way that the United States should be ordered. That doesn't mean everyone needs to be Anglo or Christian to understand American values, but it does mean that these things are core. And the only reason they were self-evident was that those people observed them. And so, if we want we want the civics education, yes, but the only reason that the civics education works is if it is planted in the soil of the values from which that civitas arose. And so I really hope that we get both of those things if we want to root people in these beliefs and these freedoms.
Very true. Again, Auron MacIntyre here on the program. We do hope you buy the book. He is the author of Total State, How Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies. It is Auron MacIntyre Substack. And then we hope you follow him on Twitter. Again, Auron MacIntyre. It is the Auron MacIntyre Show on Apple, Spotify, Rumble, and YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts in general. Or anything else before we end the program? Or did I get everything?
No, I think you got it all. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thanks so much, Auron, and we'll see you next time.